Now we'd like to proceed with the discussion. So as debaters, I would like to invite Min Kim, Professor CEO, Korean Medical Device Development Fund, and Hyun Nam, CEO of iSense, and Dr. Hanu Park, President and CEO, Pioneer Corporation, onto the stage. So we have three panelists on the stage now. Once we are ready for the discussion session, then you can begin the session. Right? Seems like, yeah. Yes, of course. That's your choice. So we have prepared a perfect interpretation service, so you can choose.
All right, I'll speak in English. That's Korean. Excuse me. So, it was a great honor for me to know what KFDA actually is working on and the fund, how the 1 trillion USD fund is being used in detail. And thanks to you, I had a good understanding of what is going on. And in terms of global competitive market and strategy and approving strategies, among other issues, and how that is allocated and distributed. And it was highly helpful. And the procedures and how they were selected, if that kind of data was included and if you provide that as well in the future, then that will be informative too. And in the market, if you introduce those market players in our market, and if you provide that data so others can refer to, then it will be very helpful and for others to get information about that as well. So overall, the KMDF's information data and how the organization has been working on contributing this industry. So thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you. First of all, I expect to get some questions from you, and I'll just probably talk about the market. And we do have some significant information, and if you do want some specific information, if you contact me, then I can provide you. So, well then, I would like to ask one question about the market. And last year, when the COVID-19, when it began the outbreak, we, under the theme of K-Bio, we also named K-Quarantine, and many people were excited about this hype. And, and as you have shown from your presentation, we used to import goods, and now we changed it to a surplus. And I myself, being an industry player, if I took a look in this data, there were some limited number of companies, so I wouldn't say that if the industry itself is well activated to say that we're actually activating this K quarantine or K vaccine. So from the government level, if we take a step aside from being excited about this all hype, and we have to think back why we were so excited about this, and actually a countless number of companies jumped into this market. However, ultimately, you can see Seagen or other unnamed companies from the presentation. Some companies made some trillions of dollars of profit, but meanwhile, other companies put a lot of efforts, but just made some trillion billion Korean won, or even they lost their money. So there were some winners take all. So as a personal discussion participant, I would like to urge some interest or participation from the government is that, or some other outsourcing ideas is that how they began and how they worked on this and how they made this kind of success, and in other fields why those other companies failed in this market. If you come up with that kind of analyzing data, then if we face another possible pandemic in the future, how we are going to take counter countermeasures and how we are going to take this challenge into an opportunity, that kind of idea. So if you take a look at this R&D research data, then it is highly focused on this R&D. However, if you cover those marketing parts, and if you think back of the past, then if you provide that kind of source of data, then it will be highly informative.
Should I go ahead first? Yes, I think that was a great comment and idea because there are some successful cases, and as you know, there are a number of failed cases as well. But what is more important is whether it's sustainable. We do not know how the pandemic will change its trajectory, but let's say let's say there's a brand, you don't even know what is going to happen to the brand. So, as CEO Nam mentioned, I think we have to understand why a certain project or brand failed, or why, if it succeeded, succeeded. It's not like I'm representing the government or anything, but as one of the funding agencies, I talked to many different stakeholders, including medical device industry, related to the device industry. And this is definitely a great moment for us to look back and review what went well and what needs to be improved, what is our strength and what is our gap that we have to fill. So that for strength, we have to develop them further. And then if there's anything lacking, we need to fill that gap as well. So we are going to take the leadership in this project. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have an additional thing to say about that issue. So for those companies that made a success and for those companies that made a failure, and the key difference between the two is that the conventional diagnostic medical kit market is highly conservative, and those companies that recognize this position and if they have a supply chain or not. And for this diagnostic kit, if for those companies who have previously distributed their medical kit, there were cases where you have to use those medical equipment to work on it. So for those companies that had not have any medical equipment in the past, then they had a lot of challenges. And CGen is a company that made a success in this part because CGen has distributed a lot of medical equipment and nationwide. And for among other global companies, they based on the previous conventional platform, they increased their sales significantly. So and also my Bionia company also itself also had a lot of market penetration in terms of medical equipment. So thanks to that platform, we could make a lot of sales. And for medical kit, there was some medical equipment shortage last year because in the United States there was some export prohibit. So when that happened, when we were a provider for a third medical kit, and we provided 1,100 folds of additional supply, and we were keep making sales. And last year, in vitro market, if you take a look at the market, and as you mentioned before, if you take a look at the entire market, it slightly exceeds $80 million. And last year, the COVID market is projected to become about 119 billion US dollars or so. And how this COVID-19 market, vaccine market, will be like. Because of potential variants, the market will keep ongoing and activated. And there are some opinions that this market will shrink in the years to come. And if, as you, head of Korea Medical Device Development Fund, what is your personal opinion regarding this issue?
Well, that was a very tricky question you just asked. I think I can maybe give an overview and then go into detail. From my understanding, there is expertise that we have accumulated and that we possessed, But I think there are many different researchers and companies with different technologies and capabilities, and we continue to communicate with them. We get information and data from them, and we also hear news, and we're basically a media and a hub of transacting and exchanging that data and knowledge. And when I think there are companies that were suitable and got lucky when it comes to timing and timeline. And as you mentioned, what matters is how you can better utilize a supply chain that you have developed. And because there was some learning factor from SARS, there were some early movers who prepared themselves quicker than anyone else. And I think act fast is really, really important going forward. And maybe going back to your question next, you were asking whether this is going to continue to grow or the size of the market is going to be maintained. But it's really tricky to predict what's going to happen because of a vaccination, we are finding a solution, sort of. But then, if you think about all the results and achievements that we have made, they have to be converted to the medical system, and this is actually burdening the medical system and infrastructure. So whether it's sustainable, I'm not so sure. I think it'll be very difficult because in the past, like last year, for example, it was a national emergency. So the government was providing support in order to successfully tackle this contingency. But now without this, we will have to basically be on our own and then manage the issue. So it'll be difficult. And just by looking at COVID-19, I think the market itself is going to shrink because, like, we do not know how much control we're going to have about mutation or variants. So it's still up in the air. But if you only look at the COVID-19 market, it's going to shrink. And one thing I would like to say at this occasion is not just the diagnosis market, but pandemic is already has been penetrated into our lifestyle, daily lives. So I think relevant markets could grow in the future. For example, indoor or outdoor. For example, air-related issues or filtering issues, ventilation issues, or other home appliances. If you think about them, whether these appliances are going to tackle COVID-19 or any other infectious diseases, these market needs could be expanded, and then maybe you can think out of the box.
I'm not sure how many minutes we have until the end of this discussion session. Like, how many minutes do we have? Oh, 7 minutes. So, as you said, CEO Park, the previously widespread medical equipment and those conventional players could take advantage of it, but those new participants had a lot of challenges. So, and despite that, meanwhile, the entire nation was highly excited about this K vaccine issue, and many companies became late participants, and that is because the IVD market's overall characteristics were not fully understood by those companies, I personally think. So, and between companies and companies, it is totally impossible for those companies to share their information with each other. Because if you take a look at those Korean newspapers and my news media outlets, that some companies received the EUA from the stage, or like, and they came up with a lot of index. But some companies, instead of getting the EUA, they went to the WHO and got approval from the organization and distributed their supply chain to other places. So if you take a close look at all the background information and like this, and if companies fail to share their information, then there will be some winners and losers. And the more those companies that appear in the Korean market, that is good for us as a national level. And the characteristics of IBD market where it is difficult for companies to share their own information, and how we're going to working on the clinical trials and how we're going to access this market and this kind of data. Probably at some point we do need this kind of information sharing, and if we come up with this kind of significant data where other companies and entities can refer to, then this will contribute to the development of this. And for example, for FO2, they do have the same conventional medical kit, but those based on the tests, they take their photo of this and they share this to the airline company. And when you go to the airline company, then the previously medical kit data can be synchronized with the vaccination or the medical test. So if you make use of it, then we can make meaningful results. And nowadays, many companies are just busy looking for distributing measures, and I have never seen a case where there was an interaction cases with Carl. And if there were any cases where a company or an entity can make up with a small diagnostic kit at the international airport. If we open a room for this kind of thing to happen, then it will be of a lot of help.
I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer this question, but when our institute was created, I think one of the core principle or issues were included in your previous comment. Let's say there's a new idea or there is a new market entrance that's necessary. Where do you start? I think that is an important point because there is a lot of infrastructure and including government agencies pre-existing. However, the reason why we decided to choose a location in Seoul station was because we want it to be accessible by everyone. Whenever there's a new idea, and if you want to maybe start a discussion with stakeholders, I want those candidates to come to us so that we can provide help and support for the development of the ideas. But I think what you mentioned is maybe larger or bigger than what I just mentioned. The government can create some rules and routes, but I don't think that is very familiarized by stakeholders and participants. But maybe the pandemic has shifted this pre-notion. So if you're going to plan anything, then maybe things will be different in the future. We will also work hard.
Thank you. And I think this will be the last question for this session. And after the outbreak of COVID-19, the molecule diagnostic kit is widely used in the world, and in Korea, we successfully made use of this to preemptively find COVID-19 patients who contracted the virus. And the molecule-based diagnostic kits typically takes 4 hours, or if you have to be at a specific place, and there are some limitations. And in order to overcome those challenges, we need next generation technology, I personally think. And the Korea Medical Device Development Fund, what kind of vision do you have, and what kind of medical equipments do you think there should be developed? Well, I'll just talk about this briefly, and there are some macro and broad projects currently working on. The molecule diagnostic kit is the standard, and in order to speed up developing this, there are some various ideas, and we are supporting those projects. And I personally think that we do need this kind of efforts, and there are amplifying technologies, or if we come up with new primers, among other efforts. So we're supporting those kind of new technologies, and in order to introduce those technologies to the market as soon as possible. That is also important, but if it is also important to make the conventional medical device and kits more strong. There were a lot of developments in the diagnostic kit industry. However, if you ask a question if the fundamentals of those grew as well, then I'm not quite sure because the preemptive or previous medical kit technologies, you have to take parallel measures to develop those industries as well. And continuously, we will put efforts to identify and develop new technologies. And we are currently planning on identifying and developing new technologies. And if there are good people with good ideas or opinions, and then if you come up with me and share your ideas, and I will highly appreciate it.
All right. Thank you very much for the discussion session.